You never expect a family to plan your exit like they're arranging a party. You expect arguments, disappointments, the slow erosion of closeness, not a sentence delivered with that casual, efficient cruelty. "We'll get rid of her after New Year." That line landed in my kitchen like a dropped glass. It was quiet in the way. A trap is quiet. No drama, no raised voices, just the cold business of deciding someone's place in the world. And the worst part was how ordinary it sounded coming from my daughter-in-law, Liza, while my son Mark nodded like she'd just read the weather report. It was the week between Christmas and New Year. The house still smelled faintly of cinnamon and pine. My wife had left the tree up, a small rebellion against throwing everything away before the New Year had a chance to start clean. Guests had been here a few times in December, cousins, co-workers, the neighborhood elderly who still like a roast and someone to grumble at, we'd laughed, eaten. I'd handed out odd little keepsakes, photos, old tools, the things you pass down because they contain memory more than value. On the morning it happened, I was at the sink, rinsing coffee mugs, thinking about nothing at all, when the kitchen door opened and Liza stepped in with Mark behind her. He looked tired, the way a man looks when he's learned to sleep with his phone tucked under an arm. She had one of those faces that smiled like it meant the exact opposite. I froze mid-movement because she said it as if she were reminding him to pick up milk. "We'll get rid of her after New Year," she said. Mark glanced at me with that look you get when your life has become a meeting you don't want to attend. "Yeah," he said, almost apologetic, as if the plan were some necessary logistics. The words hovered above the dishes, and I don't know which of us broke first, me or the china. My hands went still. The coffee stopped steaming. For a second I thought maybe I'd misheard, maybe we're talking about the old couch in the garage that had been a family project and not me. But then Liza's eyes met mine, cool and steady. "You've got to understand," she added, like explaining a schedule. "It'll be better for everyone. New start, less obligations," she said. Obligations, like it was a tax form that needed filing. My wife Margaret didn't speak right away. She just put a hand on my arm, the kind of touch that says more than a dozen questions. Her face was small and drawn. We'd been married 42 years. The map of our life was the lines around her mouth. She'd raised 4 kids, worked 2 jobs sometimes, and listened while I came home with mud on my boots and stories about the day. She had never been prone to theatrics. When she looked at me that morning without anger or even tears, really only a tired sorrow, I knew this wasn't about money or a silly family quarrel. This was a step, a crossing over. "Don't be dramatic," Mark mumbled, trying to smooth it. "You know that tone, the one people use when they're trying to turn a knife into a bandage. Well, make sure she has, options. A place money. It's not personal, not personal." The phrase tasted like a lie. Everything is personal when you've put 30 years of your life into a house, when the walls hold every argument, every apology, every child's scraped knee and hug. For Mark to call it not personal was to tell me all the ways I no longer mattered. I walked into the living room slowly, the couch where Mark had once been a boy and now sat as a married man, the mantel with the photos, Mark at graduation, Mark asleep at a sleepover, Mark and Liza in front of their small apartment when they first married, and I'd taken him a casserole because grown-up life had hit like a cold wave. I felt a hand tighten on my sleeve, Margaret's way of holding me steady without words. "Is this," I started. I didn't even finish, because what else do you ask when your child arranges your disappearance like a bank transaction? Where did they expect me to go to vanish between the cushions? Liza's mouth quirked, not unkind, but very practiced. "You struggle," she said. "You fall behind on things. It's just too much." Her voice did that dismissive thing people use when they want to reduce a human being to a checklist. "After New Year." Well, make it clean. Clean. What a neat, polite word for erasing someone's life. I thought about the nights I'd stayed up with Mark when he had fevers, about the summers. I'd fixed his bike tire in the rain. The weekends I worked overtime so he could go to football camp. I thought of Margaret fetching sketches he'd left under a bed, sewing up a costume for a school play. I thought of mortgage papers signed in my 20s, hands raw from work, because you signed for a future you expect to see. I thought of the house itself, every nail, every painted wall, every winter we made it through like a ledger of small graces. Instead, they sounded like liabilities. I could have given them a piece of my mind. I could have risen loud and righteous and named the wrongs like a man reading a list. But I saw Liza's fingers tighten around her coffee mug and Mark's jaw clench a little as if someone had pressed on a sore tooth they'd rehearsed. There was a practiced economy to it that made me realize this had been planned not in a fit, but like an agenda item. So I did something else. I smiled. Not a small, forgiving smile, but the kind of smile that's a quiet promise. I folded my hands, placed them on the table, and said, "After New Year, huh?" "Yes," Liza said, straightforward. "After New Year?" "Good," I said. "That gives us time to rearrange things." They blinked. I watched confusion ripple across Mark's face like a small animal startled. Margaret breathed out relief and fear folded together. No one in the room understood then what I meant, least of all Liza, but that moment stayed with me. The calendar had become a weapon in their mouths. I would make it a witness in mine. You don't always know where a story begins. Sometimes it starts with a package, sometimes with an absence. For me, it started with those words in the quiet days around New Year, a sentence that marked them as people who made plans for other lives without asking. They imagined an empty chair, a smooth transition, and I imagined something else entirely. They thought they were arranging an ending. They didn't realize they were walking into one. And that New Year, when the lights blinked out and the countdown left echoes in the street, would be the place where their plans met the consequence they'd scheduled for me. It's strange how betrayal doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in layers, a whisper here, a change of tone there, until one day you look around and realize you've been slowly erased from your own life. After that morning in the kitchen, I spent a lot of time watching, listening, measuring silence. When you live with people long enough, you can hear their intentions and how they close doors and how they pour their tea and what they don't say. Mark and Liza stayed in the guest room for the holidays. They said it was to spend time together as a family. But I noticed how Liza's eyes wandered every time she looked at the old furniture, the oak dining table I built with my own hands stare at it like it was something she'd inherited by accident. My wife Margaret still set places for everyone, cooked full breakfast, smiled politely, but her smile had become a duty, not a joy. Liza had a way of filling a room with opinions, the kind that sounded like suggestions, but felt like orders. "This kitchen could be so much brighter if we knocked down that wall," she'd say, tracing her manicured finger along the paint. "I'd brushed myself 20 years ago." Or, "That spare room would make a great nursery. It's such a waste keeping it full of old things, old things." That's what she called my books, my tools, my father's clock, the wooden chest with family photos, everything that held a story. And Mark, my son, just nodded, the same boy who once begged me to tell stories about that clock, how his grandfather fixed it during the war, how it had ticked through blackouts and bomb drills, now just looked bored, as if sentiment was a weakness he couldn't afford. It wasn't like it'd become cruel overnight, but there was something hollow in him now. Corporate exhaustion, maybe. A kind of moral erosion that success brings when you start trading kindness for efficiency. He'd talk about asset consolidation and property optimization like he was describing feelings, not finances. I began to understand they weren't just talking about getting rid of me. They were talking about the house, the land, the thing I had built over 4 decades with sweat, knees, and hope. I'd paid off the mortgage 15 years ago. The house was in my name, though. Mark and Liza seemed to think that was some sort of technicality. Liza especially liked to hint at inheritance strategy. "It's not that we don't appreciate what you've done," she said one night over dinner. But you could make things easier for everyone by simplifying. Downsizing, before it becomes a burden. A burden. I asked my fork, pausing mid-air. Well, she shrugged, you're not getting any younger. Maintaining all this, she waved at the dining room. It's a lot of work. You and Margaret should be enjoying life, not worrying about roofs and taxes. Mark jumped in quickly, trying to sound reasonable. We're just thinking long term. Dad, maybe move into something smaller, a retirement village or what? I said quietly. So you can flip this place. Liza smiled, that tight little smile she had when she thought she was being misunderstood. Don't make it sound so crude. We're just planning ahead. Families do that. Families. I looked across the table at my wife. Her fork was still, her face pale. She was watching me, waiting to see if I'd react. But something in me had gone cold. I'd learned over the years that you don't fight every battle with noise. Some you win by listening. That night after they went upstairs, I found Margaret in our room folding laundry that didn't need folding. Her hands were trembling. You heard them? She asked softly. I nodded. They've been talking about it for weeks. I heard her on the phone, she said. Her voice cracked. She said after New Year it would be easier to convince you that she already had a buyer lined up. I felt the blood drain from my face. A buyer for the land, I think. She said the location was prime. Margaret looked at me, eyes wet. Mark knows. He doesn't stop her. Of course he didn't. I'd seen the way he deferred to her. She had a sharpness he admired. She moved through life like a CEO, even in her sleep. Every decision calculated, every kindness transactional. To her, people were assets or liabilities. I was a liability. That night, while Margaret slept, I walked through the house in the dark. I touched the door frames. I'd sanded the dent in the banister from when Mark tripped running to open his first Christmas gift. The mark on the wall from the time I tried to fix a shelf and missed the stud. Every imperfection was proof that life had been lived here, proof that I'd mattered. I ended up in the shed, my workshop. It smelled of cedar and oil and old summers. My father's hammer still hung on the pegboard. I ran my hand over it and thought of him, how he'd taught me that when you build something with your own hands, it belongs to you in a way no paper ever could. That a man's home isn't just shelter, it's his history written in wood and dust. By the time the clock hit 3 a.m., I wasn't angry. I was grieving. Not just for the house, but for the son. I thought I knew. Over the next few days, the pattern grew clearer. Liza took calls in the hallway, whispering. Mark avoided me. When I entered a room, their conversations stopped. And then, one afternoon, I overheard her again, this time outside on the porch, her voice sharp against the winter air. Yes, she said into the phone. After New Year, the paperwork's ready. Hez too sentimental to fight it. She laughed. That laugh, that's what did it. I'd given them everything, education, shelter. Or my name. I'd worked nights, cut corners, sold my truck once just to pay tuition, and now the woman my son chose to marry laughed about getting rid of me. You start replaying your life in those moments. You see the small steps that led to this, the times you said yes when you should have said no, the way you let people take pieces of you in the name of peace. Margaret noticed the change in me. She didn't say anything, but she knew. She'd been with me long enough to recognize the quiet before the storm. One evening she touched my arm and whispered, "Don't do anything foolish." I looked at her, and for the first time in a long while I smiled. Foolish. "No," I said. "But I won't be taken for a fool either," she nodded. She didn't ask for details. She knew better. That was the difference between her and Liza. Margaret understood that silence doesn't always mean weakness. Sometimes it's the sound of something forming, slow, deliberate, unstoppable. As the days passed, I watched Mark pack up their things. He talked about heading back after the new year, how life gets busy again. He mentioned maybe coming by with a realtor sometime in January. My heart twisted, but I didn't argue. I just listened, nodded, took notes. When New Year's Eve came, the house was full of forced laughter. Liza insisted on taking a family photo for memories. She posed us in front of the fireplace I'd built brick by brick, and as the flash went off, I thought, this will be the last picture they ever take here. At midnight, we toasted. They counted down 10, 9, 8, champagne in hand. I watched them clink glasses, their faces lit by the glow of the TV. They had no idea. When the clock struck 12, fireworks bloomed outside, and I whispered under my breath, "Happy New Year, Liza." She looked over, smiling. "To new beginnings," she said. She had no idea how right she was, because I had already decided they might come back after New Year expecting to get rid of me. But by the time they returned, there would be nothing left for them to take. Not the house, not the land, not even the memory of control, and that I decided would be my gift. To them, the last lesson I'd ever teach my son. The morning after New Year's Day, the house felt different, still quiet but not peaceful, like a storm had passed, and I was standing in the wreckage trying to decide what to rebuild. Mark and Liza had packed the car the night before. They were heading back to the city, their world of deadlines, dinner parties, and shallow smiles. When Mark hugged me goodbye, it was quick, distracted, more like an obligation than affection. Liza just waved her perfume, lingering long after the car disappeared down the road. The sound of their tires crunching down the driveway was the last sound before silence swallowed everything. Margaret stood by the window watching until the car vanished. Then she turned to me, her eyes searching. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Her voice wasn't frightened. It was tired, tired of being dismissed, tired of being polite, tired of waiting for our son to remember who he was. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten breakfast with a boy who once drew dinosaurs on napkins and promised he'd always take care of us. I looked at my wife and said, "I'm going to make sure they get exactly what they asked for." "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "they'll come back after New Year's, but not to this." She didn't speak for a moment. Then she nodded, slow, deliberate. "Do what you need to do." That was all. No arguments, no pleading, just understanding. That's how you know someone's been beside you through real life. They stop needing explanations. I spent the next few days walking the property, thinking 40 years of life in those walls, every nail, every joint, every memory built by my hands. The house wasn't just home, it was proof of effort, of love, of decades of showing up. And that was exactly why I couldn't let them turn it into a profit. See, the thing about being underestimated, about being treated like you're too old, too sentimental, too slow, is that but forget what you're capable of when you've got nothing left to lose. On the third day I went into town, picked up boxes, tapes, storage bins. I stopped by the hardware store too, the one I'd been shopping at since the 80s, and bought a few things that would make most people curious. Heavy-duty tarps, contractor bags, gloves, a new lockbox. The clerk didn't ask questions. Around here, everyone minds their own business. Back home, I started packing, not frantically, not emotionally, just methodically, room by room. Margaret helped her silence steady beside me. Every photo, every keepsake, every scrap of our life went into storage containers labeled by decade. As I worked, I started thinking about all the ways Mark and Liza had talked about simplifying how they wanted me out of my own home, how they'd spoken as though my existence was an inconvenience. I realized something: they weren't trying to simplify my life. They were trying to erase it. And once that truth hit me, something inside me shifted. The old softness, the habit of excusing, of hoping people would change it, died quietly. What replaced it wasn't anger. Not exactly. It was clarity. I'd spent my entire life building things, houses, businesses, relationships. But this time, I was going to build an ending. The turning point came late one evening as I stood in the doorway of the living room. The fireplace was cold, the room half empty, boxes stacked along the walls. I could still hear Liza's voice echoing in my head. Well, get rid of her after New Year. Get rid of her. Not me, her, my wife. The woman who had stood by me when I had nothing but a set of tools and a dream. That's when my decision hardened into something unbreakable. I wasn't just defending a house. I was defending us. I took out the old folder from the safe property, deeds, receipts, the legal documents that most people forget about until it's too late. I spent hours going through them, rereading every line, every clause. There were details even Mark didn't know, because when I bought this land decades ago, I'd done something smart. I registered it under a small family trust with me as the executor, which meant that even if I sold or transferred ownership, the final control stayed with me until the day I died. They thought they were clever, but they'd built their plans on assumptions. And assumptions are where the powerful lose to the patient. That night I made calls to an old friend from my construction days who now ran a moving company. To a lawyer I trusted, a quiet man who owed me a favor, to a real estate contact who specialized in private listings. I didn't tell them everything, just enough to set things in motion. By the time the sun rose, the plan was forming clearly in my head. Margaret made coffee. I remember she didn't ask a single question. She just poured it into my favorite mug and said softly, "It's time, isn't it?" I nodded. "It's time." She took my hand. "Make sure it hurts where it should." It wasn't a cruel thing to say. It was protective. She'd seen what Liza's kind of cruelty did, how it drained dignity, drop by drop. She knew I wasn't after revenge for revenge's sake. I was after balance. As the week went on, I felt a strange calm take over me, like a man who finally decides to stop patching leaks and just builds a new house altogether. I wasn't acting out of rage anymore. I was acting out of reason. I wasn't going to yell or argue or threaten. I was going to act so quietly, so completely, that by the time they realized what I'd done, it would already be finished. That's the moment the victim in me died, because I understood something simple. People who think they can replace you, erase you, or profit from you, they only succeed because you let them. So I stopped letting them. By the end of that week, the house was stripped bare of anything sentimental. Every photo, every keepsake, every trace of our life was gone, safe, stored, untouchable. The land would soon follow, and when Mark and Liza returned after New Year, thinking they'd start fresh, thinking they'd finally get rid of her, they'd be the ones standing in the empty space, realizing too late that everything they'd tried to take had already been taken back. That was the moment I decided if they wanted a clean slate, I'd give them one. Only it wouldn't look like they imagined. It would look like a vacant lot. Silent, stripped, final. And in that silence, they'd finally understand what it feels like to lose something you thought would always be yours. You don't teach someone a lesson by shouting at them. You teach them by removing every prop they thought the world was built on and letting them see how hollow it was. That's the kind of lesson I wanted to teach. Quiet, absolute, unarguable. After the turning point, I did what most people do when they're serious about something practical. I made lists, long ones, the sort of lists that calm you down because they turn emotion into boxes you can check. I spread a legal pad across the kitchen table and started with one question. What exactly could I do as the legal owner that would be irreversible enough to match what they planned for us? The answers were all boring and bureaucratic, which is why they work. Paper and signatures, permits and timelines. Those are the levers ordinary people overlook when they skim headlines for drama. I wanted no drama. I wanted inevitable. Step 1. Inventory and documentation. I pulled every paper from the safe, Deeds, the trust documents, receipts for major repairs, property tax receipts, going back decades, insurance policies. I photographed everything and made 3 copies. One stayed in my drawer, one went into the safe deposit box at the bank, and one I handed to my lawyer. Facts don't care about feelings. With facts on your side, people can scream all they want, but the law simply doesn't echo emotion. Step 2. Legal counsel, surgical, not theatrical. I called the lawyer I'd used for some tenant disputes years ago as a quiet man, not the sort to grandstand. I told him exactly what we'd overheard and what I wanted to accomplish, not vengeance for its own sake, but closure and protection. We discussed weight. At the trust allowed how to transfer or sell the property, what notices were required, and how to avoid a messy legal battle that would result in headlines. He advised me on timing, on tax consequences, on how to structure the sale so it closed, while he also advised me to be precise about utilities insurance and any liens. That meant I needed to do the tedious work others ignore. Step 3. Secure the sentimental things. This part was quieter than most people expect. Memories are fragile. If you want to make a point without cruelty, you don't burn the photos, you protect them. I packed family albums, my father's watch, Margaret's wedding dress, every card the kids had handed me, everything that mattered into archival boxes. I rented a climate-controlled storage unit under a name that wouldn't give anything away. I drove the truck there myself at night. Margaret beside me, both of us moving like conspirators into a temporary exile for our own lives. We labeled nothing for sale and nothing evidence. We labeled everything by decade. Step 4. The contractors and permits. If you own a house, you can tear it down. You can also sell the lot with a condition: the buyer wants an empty parcel. Developers pay well for prime lots and they don't want to wait. My lawyer and I drafted a conditional sale agreement. The buyer would close contingent on the seller, me removing the structure. That need for removal is how you get a crew in. Quietly, renovation site clearing. I called a foreman I knew from years on the job and explained the situation. In plain terms, he understood the scale. He booked a crew for the week. The house would be empty, filed the permits in my name, and scheduled dumpsters and a roll-off for debris. Permits take time. That was deliberate. I started the permit applications while Daniel and Liza were still here, masked as a property appraisal and minor maintenance. The town office is full of people who assume ELDA. Bars fix things out of habit. No one batted an eye when I asked for a site assessment. The permit was approved with a notice period that would align perfectly with their trip. You start replaying your life in those moments. You see the small steps that led to this, the times you said yes when you should have said no, the way you let people take pieces of you in the name of peace. Margaret noticed the change in me. She didn't say anything, but she knew. She'd been with me long enough to recognize the quiet before the storm. One evening she touched my arm and whispered, "Don't do anything foolish." I looked at her, and for the first time in a long while I smiled. Foolish? "No," I said. "But I won't be taken for a fool either," she nodded. She didn't ask for details. She knew better. That was the difference between her and Liza. Margaret understood that silence doesn't always mean weakness. Sometimes it's the sound of something forming, slow, deliberate, unstoppable. As the days passed, I watched Mark pack up their things. He talked about heading back after the new year, how life gets busy again. He mentioned maybe coming by with a realtor sometime in January. My heart twisted, but I didn't argue. I just listened, nodded, took notes. When New Year's Eve came, the house was full of forced laughter. Liza insisted on taking a family photo for memories. She posed us in front of the fireplace I'd built brick by brick, and as the flash went off, I thought, this will be the last picture they ever take here. At midnight, we toasted. They counted down 10, 9, 8, champagne in hand. I watched them clink glasses, their faces lit by the glow of the TV. They had no idea. When the clock struck 12, fireworks bloomed outside, and I whispered under my breath, "Happy New Year, Liza." She looked over, smiling. To new beginnings, she said. She had no idea how right she was because I had already decided they might come back after New Year expecting to get rid of me. But by the time they returned, there would be nothing left for them to take. Not the house, not the land, not even the memory of control, and that I decided would be my gift. To them, the last lesson I'd ever teach my son. The morning after New Year's Day, the house felt different, still quiet but not peaceful, like a storm had passed and I was standing in the wreckage trying to decide what to rebuild. Mark and Liza had packed the car the night before. They were heading back to the city, their world of deadlines, dinner parties, and shallow smiles. When Mark hugged me goodbye, it was quick, distracted, more like an obligation than affection. Liza just waved her perfume, lingering long after the car disappeared down the road. The sound of their tires crunching down the driveway was the last sound before silence swallowed everything. Margaret stood by the window watching until the car vanished. Then she turned to me, her eyes searching. "What are you going to do?" she asked. Her voice wasn't frightened. It was tired, tired of being dismissed, tired of being polite, tired of waiting for our son to remember who he was. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where I'd eaten breakfast with a boy who once drew dinosaurs on napkins and promised he'd always take care of us. I looked at my wife and said, "I'm going to make sure they get exactly what they asked for." "What does that mean?" "It means," I said, "they'll come back after New Year's, but not to this." She didn't speak for a moment. Then she nodded, slow, deliberate. "Do what you need to do." That was all. No arguments, no pleading, just understanding. That's how you know someone's been beside you through real life. They stop needing explanations. I spent the next few days walking the property, thinking 40 years of life in those walls, every nail, every joint, every memory built by my hands. The house wasn't just home. It was proof of effort, of love, of decades of showing up. And that was exactly why I couldn't let them turn it into a profit. See, the thing about being underestimated, about being treated like you're too old, too sentimental, too slow, is that but forget what you're capable of when you've got nothing left to lose. On the third day I went into town, picked up boxes, tape, storage bins. You don't burn bridges you might one day need to cross again. You let the law and logistics do the work of teaching a lesson. That was the plan, precise, patient, and impossible to dispute. They thought they had the calendar. I had the calendar too. They thought they were the architects of my exit. They didn't realize that the architect they were underestimating had been planning for years. And then we waited. When you spend weeks planning something that big, you expect some grand cinematic moment, thunder shouting, maybe a few tears. What you actually get is silence. Long, thick silence that feels heavier than any argument ever could. The morning they were due back, the air was cold enough to make the dirt crunch underfoot. The demolition crew was finishing up sweeping dust from the street and loading the last pieces of twisted metal into the dumpster. By noon, all that remained of my house, our house, was a flat stretch of land and the faint smell of cut pine and diesel. Margaret and I stood across the road, leaning on the fence. We looked like two tired people watching workers do what workers do every day. To anyone passing by, we might have been curious neighbors. To me, it was the final punctuation mark on a sentence 20 years long. Their car turned the corner right on time. Daniel's old SUV, silver and streaked with road salt. Liza sat in the passenger seat, sunglasses on, phone in hand. They slowed when they saw the orange safety fence around the lot. For a moment, the car didn't move. Then the door opened. Daniel got out first. He just stood there, squinting like maybe he was looking at the wrong house. Liza followed her hand halfway to her mouth. The engine idled behind them, the hum filling the quiet. What happened?" Daniel's voice cracked halfway through the question. "Where's the house?" I didn't answer right away. I just kept looking at the space where the porch used to be, where the swing once hung. It looked wise. stir without the house, endless, almost clean. Margaret turned to me and whispered, "You should tell him." I nodded. "Daniel," I said, my voice calm, almost conversational, "the house is gone. Sold the lot last week." He blinked. "Sold? What are you talking about? You can't." "I can." I said, "I was the sole owner. The trust only applies to the proceeds, not the property itself. It's all legal. The paperwork's filed." Liza's sunglasses came off slowly. You sold it. You tore it down." Why, I looked right at her, and for the first time I saw her without the polish. Just another person trying to make her voice sound stronger than her fear. "Because I heard you," I said. Her face went still. Daniel looked between us, confused. "What are you talking about?" Liza's jaw tightened. She knew. She remembered. Her silence said everything. I went on. "You said, well, get rid of her after New Year. You didn't whisper it like an accident. You said it like a plan." Daniel turned to her sharply. "What Liza did you?" I didn't mean she started, but I held up a hand. "I don't need excuses," I said. "I don't need apologies. I just wanted you both to see what happens when people treat someone like a burden they can schedule out of their lives. You wanted a clean start. Well, you got one. A clean lot. No memories, no inheritance. Just dirt." Daniel took a few steps toward me, shaking his head. "Dad, that's crazy. You can't just demolish the house. That was our home, our childhood." "It was mine," I interrupted. "Your childhood ended when you stopped coming home for holidays unless there was something in it for you. I kept it standing because I believed one day you'd appreciate what it meant. But you didn't. You saw a title deed, not a home." He looked stunned. "You think I was using you? I think you stopped seeing me as your father," I said quietly. "You saw me as an obstacle." The crew finished loading the last dumpster. The foreman waved, tipped his hat, and drove off. The street went still again. A few neighbors had gathered behind their fences, pretending to check their mail, watching the scene unfold. Margaret stayed silent beside me, her hand resting on my arm. Liza's face was pale. She finally spoke, her tone sharper now, defensive. "You didn't have to go this far. We were just talking. People say things when they're frustrated." "You said it," I cut in. "Not once. Not in passing. You said it with intent." "Well, get rid of her after New Year. That's not frustration. That's a plan." Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. Daniel's voice rose. "So this is payback. You destroyed everything to make a point." "Not payback," I said evenly. "Correction." He looked at me like I'd spoken another language. "Correction?" "Yes, I corrected a mistake. I built my life around giving, around making sure everyone else had what they needed, and I taught you that generosity was endless. It's not. It ends the moment someone tries to weaponize it." He stared at the empty lot again as if the house might reappear if he blinked enough times. You sold the land too?" "Yes, it closed yesterday. New owner starts building next month," Liza whispered. "You can't undo that." I looked at her. Why would I? There was a long pause. A crow landed on the fence post behind them and cawed loud in the silence. Daniel ran a hand through his hair, muttering under his breath. "Unbelievable," he said finally. "You've lost it." "No," I said, stepping closer, lowering my voice. "I found it. The line. The one between love and self-respect." Margaret spoke for the first time, her tone soft but firm. "You both crossed that line when you thought kindness was weakness." Liza crossed her arms. "We didn't mean to hurt anyone. We were just tired of the drama." Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. "You were tired of us existing." Liza's mouth twisted. "That's not fair. Neither is plotting behind someone's back," Margaret said. "But fairness isn't really your concern, is it?" Daniel took a step forward. "Mom, please, don't do this. We can talk about it." Maybe we said things we shouldn't have, but you don't just burn everything down. I looked at him, holding his gaze. You didn't think twice when it was us you wanted gone. Why? Al made a plan over wine and laughter. I made a plan over paperwork and signatures. The difference is mine came with a receipt. He looked down at the dirt jaw clenched. Liza put a hand on his arm, whispering something low I couldn't hear, but I could see her face, the quick flicker of panic beneath the practiced calm. They'd come home expecting control. They found consequences instead. For a few minutes none of us spoke. The only sound was the wind brushing through the open space where walls used to stand. Margaret took my hand again. "Let's go," she said softly. We turned to leave, but Daniel's voice stopped us. "Wait." I paused, not turning. "Where are you going to live now?" he asked. I smiled a little. "Somewhere peaceful, somewhere smaller. We already moved what mattered. The rest was just lumber." He shook his head slowly, as if trying to piece together how everything had slipped away without him noticing. "You actually did it," he whispered. "You erased us." "No," I said, turning finally. "I erased what you made of us." He didn't follow. He just stood there, shoulders sagging, staring at the ground like maybe the house was buried beneath it. Liza was the one who finally broke the silence. "You'll regret this," she said, voice trembling. "You think you've won? But people will see what you did. They'll think you're cruel." I met her eyes. "Let them. I'd rather be called cruel than naive." We left them standing there. When I looked back one last time from the truck, Daniel was pacing the edge of the lot, kicking at bits of brick and wood, while Liza scrolled on her phone, probably checking property records, trying to prove it couldn't be true. But it was. Every document, every signature, every email had been filed. It was done. As we drove away, Margaret turned to me. "Do you feel better?" I thought about that for a while. The sun was low, glowing orange against the empty lot in the rearview mirror. "No," I said finally, "but I feel clean." We didn't talk much after that. Jay Hughes drove quiet, steady toward the small rental by the lake it arranged in advance. The world outside blurred into trees and fading light. Sometimes revenge isn't about rage, it's about balance. About handing people exactly what they asked for and letting them realize too late what it cost them. That was the confrontation, not a fight, not a scream, just silence heavy enough to echo. It's strange how quickly the world moves on after something monumental. One week you're the subject of whispered gossip over fences. The next people are talking about road repairs and the neighbors. New dog. That's the thing about endings. No matter how loud they feel to you, they fade fast for everyone else. But for Daniel and Liza, the noise didn't fade. It followed them. The demolition hit them like a storm they didn't see coming. At first, they thought it was temporary, some kind of misunderstanding. Daniel called me the day after, his voice strained but still trying to sound calm. He left a message saying, "Dad, we just need to talk this through. I'm sure we can fix this." I didn't return the call. By the end of that week, the reality settled in. The property was gone, sold, and the funds already reallocated. The house they'd counted on inheriting had turned into a number in my account, and soon after that number was transferred elsewhere. They tried to find out where, of course, Liza had a knack for digging into things, but I'd prepared for that. Every document, every title, every transfer had been sealed with my lawyer's firm. The proceeds from the sale were placed into a charitable trust under Margaret's, and my name's a fund dedicated to supporting elderly caregivers and single retirees who'd been left behind by their own families. The irony wasn't lost on me. I heard from a friend in town that Daniel had stormed into the lawyer's office 2 days later demanding explanations. The lawyer told him calmly that everything was legal, that the decisions were final. Daniel apparently left shouting. He's lost his mind, while Liza followed behind, face like thunder. They'd lost more than property that day. They'd lost control, and that, I think, stung the most. A month passed. The snow melted and construction began on the lot. A young couple bought it, newlyweds with bright eyes and big plans. I met them once by coincidence when I returned to collect mail. The wife smiled and said, "Well, make it a cozy place, lots of light." I wished them well. I meant it. Meanwhile, Daniel and Liza's life began to unravel in small, almost poetic ways. Daniel's promotion, the one he'd been banking on, fell through. His company was restructuring, and apparently reputation stability played a role. The gossip about what he'd done, or rather what people thought he'd done, spread fast. Small towns love stories, and our town was no exception. You can't hide something like this when your father tears down a house you claimed as your future inheritance. Liza's parents stopped visiting. They'd always seen me as the reliable one, the kind old man who treated their daughter like family. When word reached them that she'd supposedly plotted to kick us out, they didn't look at her quite the same. Liza hated that. "They think I'm a monster," she apparently told Daniel one night, loud enough that a neighbor overheard. "I wasn't trying to ruin their lives. Truly, I just let truth breathe. And truth, when left to its own devices, tends to spread like fire through dry grass." Margaret and I, on the other hand, adjusted well. Our new place by the lake was small, but that was exactly the point. 2 bedrooms, 1 floor, no stairs to worry about. I'd wake up to the sound of loons instead of traffic. The first few mornings I caught myself reaching for the old house keys, forgetting that I no longer needed them. Change takes time. Every Saturday we'd sit by the water with coffee and talk. Not about revenge, not about the past, but about little things. The garden we wanted to plant, the books we hadn't finished, the trips we'd postponed for decades. For the first time in years, there was no tension in our home, just quiet. But quiet isn't always peace. There were moments, short ones, when I'd feel a flicker of doubt. I'd remember Daniel as a boy building model cars at the kitchen table, asking endless questions. I'd see Liza laughing at family dinners before things went sour. Then I'd hear their voices again, those cold, careless words, "Well, get rid of her after New Year," and I'd remember why things had to end. By spring, they were struggling financially. The house they'd been renting was too expensive now that Daniel's bonus was gone. They'd counted on selling my property someday to pay off debts, and without it, the numbers didn't work. I knew this, not because I pried, but because they came to me. It started with an email, short, polite. From Daniel, subject, "Can we talk, Dad? I know things have been tense, but I think we need to sit down. There's been a lot of misunderstanding. We didn't mean to hurt you or Mom. Maybe we can have lunch next week. Just talk, no drama, Daniel." I read it twice. I didn't reply right away. Margaret saw me at the computer and asked, "Is it from him?" I nodded. She didn't say, "Don't go." She just said, "Be careful what you forgive." They didn't give up. 2 days later, Liza called. Her voice was soft, practiced. "Dad," she said, like the word might melt me, "we really miss you. We made a mistake. Everyone says things they don't mean, can't? We just moved past it." It would have been easier if she'd sounded genuine, but there was something brittle beneath her tone, urgency, not remorse. A person who's not sorry for what they did, only sorry. It cost them something. I told her I'd think about it. After the call, Margaret looked at me. "You're not really considering it, are you?" I shrugged. "Considering hearing them out, maybe, but not going backward." She smiled faintly. "Good." The fallout wasn't just about property or pride. It was about realization. For the first time, Daniel had to live without a safety net. For the first time, he had to face what it felt like to be on the outside looking in. The house, the inheritance, the easy fallback, all gone. He and Liza were just another couple trying to stay afloat. And you know what? I think it was the best thing that ever happened to them, because slowly, painfully, they began to grow up. I started getting updates through mutual friends. Daniel had picked up extra hours at work, no longer coasting on favors. Liza started tutoring part-time. They downsized to a smaller apartment near the city. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest. Sometimes destruction isn't cruelty. It's pruning, cutting away what's rotten, so something new can grow. Still, I kept my distance. I wasn't ready to forgive, and I wasn't obligated to. People often confuse peace with reconciliation. They're not the same. Peace is quiet inside your own mind. Reconciliation requires both sides to face what they broke, and Daniel wasn't there yet. Not then. He sent a few more emails, less demanding, more humble. I didn't answer. There's power in silence, and he needed to sit with that. But the world has a way of circling back. One Sunday morning, as I was trimming the hedges by the lake, Margaret came out holding her phone. "It's Daniel," she said. "He's outside." I turned, and there he was, standing by the gate, hands in his pockets, looking 10 years older than he did last winter. His hair was thinner, his eyes sunken but soft. He didn't look angry. "Just tired, Dad," he said quietly. "Can we talk?" Margaret looked at me. I nodded. "Give us a minute," I told her. We sat by the edge of the dock. The air was still, the water calm. He took a long breath. "I know you probably don't believe me, but I didn't mean what I said that night. I was drunk," Liza was complaining. "It was stupid talk. I didn't respond," he went on. "But I also know that's not the point. You heard what you heard, and it hurt you, and you had every right to do what you did. I just wish I hadn't made it so easy for you to give up on me." That last line landed hard. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time in a long while I saw my son, not the man who'd betrayed me. "You think I gave up on you," I said quietly. "But I didn't. I gave up waiting for you to respect me." He nodded, eyes glistening. "I know." For a long while we just sat there, the silence gentler this time. No tension, no performance. Just two men who'd both been wrong in their own ways. That conversation didn't fix everything, but it marked the beginning of something new, not the old dependency, not the guilt. Something smaller, simpler, honest. The fallout left scars. Yes, but scars are proof that wounds heal. By the time summer came around, the new family's house was nearly finished. It was beautiful white siding, blue shutters, a wide porch. Margaret and I passed by one day on our way to town, and she smiled. "It looks happy," she said. "It does," I agreed. "That's all I ever wanted it to be. And maybe that's the true ending of revenge, not when the other side suffers, but when you finally stop carrying the weight of what they did. When you can look at the space where something once stood, a house, a relationship, a part of yourself, and feel peace instead of pain. That's what the fallout taught me. Sometimes destruction is the only way to rebuild something real." It was late September when I got the call. I was sitting on the porch, the air crisp, the first orange leaves starting to fall across the lake. Margaret was inside making tea when the phone buzzed on the table. The screen lit up with a name I hadn't seen in months. "Liza." I stared at it for a moment. I wasn't sure whether to answer. Part of me wanted to let it ring, let it fade, like so many other attempts before. But curiosity, or maybe closure, got the better of me. "Hello," I said finally. There was a pause. I could hear her breathing, shaky, uneven. "Dad, it's me," she said. Her voice sounded smaller than I remembered. No sharpness, no control, just a tremor underneath. "Daniel's in the hospital," she said. He collapsed at work. Stress, exhaustion. The doctor said it was close." The words sank in slowly. "I didn't speak right away. He asked for you," she whispered. "He keeps asking if you come." I felt something in my chest tighten, not guilt exactly, but something close. Maybe the ache of unfinished things. "He'll think about it," I said quietly. Before she could reply, I ended the call. "Elle?" Margaret came out a minute later, holding 2 mugs. She saw my face and set them down. "What happened?" she asked softly. "It's Daniel," I said. "He's in the hospital." She didn't say anything for a moment, just sat down beside me, hands folded in her lap. "Are you going to go?" I exhaled. "I don't know. You should," she said. "Not for him, for you." I looked at her, searching her face. "You think that's forgiveness?" "No," she said. "I think it's peace." The next morning I went. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear, that strange mix of hope and surrender. I walked down the corridor, the sound of my shoes echoing off the tile. When I reached his room, Liza was sitting by the bed, her head bowed. She looked up when she saw me, eyes red, makeup smudged, shoulders tense. "You came," she said, like she didn't quite believe it. I nodded. My eyes went to Daniel. He looked pale, thinner than I remembered. There were dark circles under his eyes and tubes running into his arm. The steady beep of the heart monitor was the only thing cutting through the silence. I stood by the bed. For a moment, I didn't see the man who'd betrayed me. I saw the boy who used to fall asleep on my chest during storms. He stirred slightly, then blinked. When he saw me, his lips parted and he tried to sit up. "Dad, don't move," I said. My voice came out steadier than I expected. He swallowed hard. "I didn't think you'd come. I almost didn't." He nodded slowly, eyes filling. "I don't deserve that you did." For a while neither of us spoke. The silence wasn't heavy. This time it was tired, like two people finally out of words. Then he said it. "I'm sorry." It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't rehearsed. Just quiet, fragile, real. "I treated you like you owed me something," he said. "Like the house, the money. All of it was mine by right. I forgot you worked your whole life for it, that you built it brick by brick while I was busy thinking I deserved it." He looked down at his hands. "When you sold it, I was furious. I thought you wanted to hurt us. But then I realized you were just showing me what it felt like to lose something you took for granted. I didn't interrupt. I just listened." He glanced up again. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just needed you to know I finally understand." For the first time in years, I felt something shift inside me. Maybe it was the way he said it. Not pleading, not manipulating, just truth, plain and unadorned. "You grew up," I said quietly. He gave a small broken laugh. "Took long enough." Liza stood too, hesitating. "I know. I played my part," she said softly. "I thought being firm meant being in control. But I was cruel to both of you." She looked me straight in the eyes, tears gathering. "I said things I can't take back. I thought I was protecting my marriage, but really I was poisoning it." Her honesty caught me off guard. There was no performance, no blame, just regret. "I'm sorry too," she said. I nodded slowly. "I know." Margaret was right. Forgiveness wasn't what this was. It was something quieter, something closer to acknowledgement. The truth finally spoken aloud. We spent an hour together, not talking much. Daniel drifted in and out of sleep. Liza kept adjusting his blanket, fussing like a woman trying to make up for years. In one afternoon I just sat there, feeling the strange mix of sadness and peace wash over me. When I stood to leave, Daniel's eyes fluttered open again. "Dad," he murmured, voice weak, "when I'm better, can we start again? Maybe not like before, just something new." I put a hand on his shoulder. "Well, see?" I said. He smiled faintly. "That's more than I hoped for." Outside, the air felt sharper, cleaner. Margaret was waiting in the car. She didn't ask how it went. She didn't need to. We drove in silence for a while, the road winding through trees, just starting to turn gold. Finally, she said, "You look lighter." "Maybe I am," I said. "Did he apologize?" "Yes." "And you?" I listened. She smiled, the kind that says everything without words. Good, that's enough. In the following weeks, Daniel called a few times, not about the past, but about small things, how to fix a leaky faucet, what kind of soil was best for Tom. Atus. It wasn't about advice, not really. It was his way of rebuilding piece by piece. Liza wrote a letter to Margaret, too, a long one, handwritten. She said she'd been wrong, that she finally understood what family meant. Margaret cried when she read it, then tucked it into a drawer without a word. We didn't rush anything. Forgiveness isn't a door you swing open. It's a gate you unlatch slowly when you're ready, and sometimes just standing at the gate is enough. A few months later, Daniel and Liza visited. They brought flowers, simple ones, white chrysanthemums, not roses, not lilies, nothing that screamed apology, just quiet respect. We sat by the lake, the four of us, talking about weather and fishing and movies. It wasn't awkward, it wasn't forced, it was human. At one point, Daniel looked at me and said, "I still don't know how to make it right." I shook my head. "You don't, you just live better." He nodded. "I can do that." And for the first time in a long, long while, I believed him. That was the reconciliation, not a grand speech, not a tearful reunion, just honesty, effort, a shared silence that meant something new, because sometimes revenge isn't about destroying someone, it's about forcing them to see. And once they do, once they finally understand what they took and what it cost, the need for vengeance dissolves on its own. All that's left is truth, and from truth, peace finally grows. You said Section 8. ChatGPT said Section 8, the resolution, AMP, growth, 1,000 words. It's been almost a year since that day at the hospital. The lake freezes over now in winter, same as it always did, but it feels different, calmer somehow. The water doesn't seem to carry echoes anymore, just the quiet hum of life going on slow and steady. Margaret and I rebuilt what we needed to, not the house that chapter was done, but the peace that lived inside it, the one that didn't depend on walls or deeds or bloodlines. We wake up early, drink coffee by the window, and watch too. He mist roll off the water. Every morning feels like a small victory, the kind that doesn't make headlines but still changes everything. I see Daniel every few weeks now. He drives up alone, sometimes leaves Liza at home with the kids. He helps me with repairs or sits with me on the dock, legs dangling, just talking. It's not the same as it once was, it never will be, but it's something honest, and ill take that over pretending any day. He's learning what it means to start over, working longer hours, saving again, building things with his own hands. He told me once, "I used to think money made a man strong. Now I know it's what he can stand losing. That really shows who he is." I didn't respond right away, but those words stayed with me. That's the kind of truth you don't learn until you've broken something precious. Liza came by this spring, too. She brought the grandkids 2 little whirlwinds of laughter and sticky fingers. The youngest ran straight to the lake and threw stones in it, counting the ripples. Liza stood beside me for a while, hands clasped. "You know," she said quietly, "I used to think you hated me." "I did," I said, and she looked startled. I smiled faintly. "But hate's heavy. You can't carry it forever." She nodded, eyes soft. "I deserved it." "Maybe," I said. "But I've learned something since then. People can be cruel out of fear, just as much as greed." She sighed. "That was me, afraid you'd always come first." I looked at her, the woman who once plotted to get rid of me, and now standing here, shoulders slumped, sincerity in her eyes. She just looked human. Flawed, but human. "Family isn't about first or last," I said quietly. "It's about who shows up when the storm hits." She smiled, faint and grateful. "Thank you for letting me show up." After they left, I sat by the dock again, the same spot where I'd once planned everything. The sail, the move, the silence. Back then it was about revenge, about reclaiming something I thought they'd stolen from me. But now, sitting there, I realized what I'd really taken back wasn't land or money, it was dignity. That's what revenge had given me, not satisfaction, not triumph, just the quiet certainty that I hadn't let cruelty define me. I'd acted not out of rage, but out of clarity, and from that I'd found peace. Sometimes Margaret asks if I ever regretted selling the house, leaving the life we built. I tell her no. That house was never the point. It was what it represented: control, comfort, security, all the things they thought they could take from me. But when you lose everything, you learn what actually matters: a warm meal, a good night's sleep, a porch that faces the sunrise, and a heart that doesn't ache every time you hear your own child's name. That's worth more than any property deed. There's a new family living where our old house used to stand, a young couple with 2 dogs and a baby on the way. Sometimes when I drive past, I see them painting the fence or hanging lights from the eaves. They wave if they spot me, and I wave back. I don't tell them I used to live there. I don't tell them what happened. That place belongs to them now, and I like it that way. The lot isn't empty anymore. It's alive again. That feels right. Daniel's doing better. He calls me Dad again, naturally, like it's not something that needs earning. And when he hugs me goodbye, it's real, not the stiff kind you give out of duty. I can feel that he means it. Sometimes we talk about rebuilding something on the lake. Not big, not grand, just a small cabin we can all share for the kids, he says. But I think it's really for us, a new start, clean and honest. Margaret teases him about it. Just don't make your father do all the hammering, she says, laughing. He laughs too, the kind of laugh I haven't heard from him since before everything went wrong. It's strange how forgiveness sneaks up on you, not as a decision but as a feeling. One day you realize the anger doesn't own you anymore. That's how I feel now, free. Every so often I still hear that phrase in my mind. Well, get rid of her after New Year. Back then it was a knife. Now it's just a scar. It doesn't hurt it. It reminds me that trust is fragile, that love can curdle when mixed with greed, but also that people can change if you give them the chance and keep your boundaries clear. Because forgiveness without boundaries is just surrender, and revenge without reflection is just another wound. What I chose was something in between. Justice with calm hands. Last night Daniel called. He told me Liza's pregnant again. We're naming her Hope, he said. Liza thought it was fitting. I smiled alone in the kitchen. It is, I said. After we hung up, I looked out at the lake again, the moon low, the water silver. Margaret came up behind me and slipped her hand into mine. We stood there quiet. Do you ever think about how it all started? She asked softly. Sometimes, I said. But mostly I think about how it ended. She nodded. And how did it end? I smiled, with peace. That's the thing about revenge. People think it's about payback, but the truth, it's about balance. It's about setting the scales right, not so the other person suffers, but so you can finally breathe again. When you lose everything, you learn who you are. When you rebuild piece by piece with patience and clarity, you learn who you're meant to be. And me am not the woman they plotted against anymore. Am the woman who walked away, watched the house burn, and built something stronger from the ashes. The lesson. Never let people convince you that kindness means weakness. Never confuse silence with surrender, and never ever hand your peace to someone who's done nothing to earn it. Because sometimes the best revenge isn't ruin, it's rebuilding, and sometimes peace is the loudest answer of all.